The Holy Gospel according to John, the first chapter. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him.
En el mundo estaba, y el mundo por él fue hecho, pero el mundo no le conoció.
He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him.
A lo suyo vino, y los suyos no le recibieron.
But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God.
Mas a todos los que le recibieron, a los que creen en su nombre, les dio potestad de ser hechos hijos de Dios.
Who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God.
Los cuales no son engendrados de sangre, ni de voluntad de carne, ni de voluntad de varón, sino de Dios.
And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth.
Y aquel verbo fue hecho carne, y habitó entre nosotros, y vimos su gloria, gloria como del unigénito del Padre, lleno de gracia y de verdad.
John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me."
Juan dio testimonio de él, y clamó diciendo, Este es de quien yo decía, el que viene después de mí es antes de mí, porque era primero que yo.
From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace.
Porque de su plenitud tomamos todos, y gracia sobre gracia.
The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.
Pues la ley por medio de Moisés fue dada, pero la gracia y la verdad vinieron por medio de Jesucristo.
No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known.
A Dios nadie le veo jamás, el unigénito Hijo, que está en el seno del Padre. Él le ha dado a conocer el Evangelio del Señor.
You may be seated. Pastors and professional church workers oftentimes will talk about their call story. Every one of us has a call story, and especially if you go through the candidacy process in the ELCA to become a pastor or a deacon, you will be asked 1,567 times to tell your call story. Don't quote me on that number, it's not actually that many, but you get asked this a whole lot. I have a call story, and I've talked to you some about my call story. Pastor Christina has a call story, and she's shared that with you. Kimberly has a call story, and she shared that with you, and guess what? You will hear them time and time again. Because for us, it is something of an origin story of why it is that we do what we do. Now, I was reminded of another pastor's call story over the Christmas break. I had the great opportunity to see one of my former pastors, Kathy Campbell, down in Florence, South Carolina. And when I saw her, it reminded me of her call story that she told me several times, and I've got to say, it's one of my favorite call stories. I really love it. She went back to seminary later in life. She was working as a professional interior designer, but she started getting this niggling idea in the back of her brain that perhaps God was calling her to ministry. Now, I don't want to speak for my colleagues over there or any other colleagues that have call stories, but when I first started getting that idea in my mind that perhaps God was calling me to ministry, I did not run off skipping to go to seminary. I ran the other way. You know the cartoon things where like the bird like in the whirlwind like flies away and feathers are kind of left there? That was kind of me. I ran in sheer terror from the idea of being in ministry. And my friend Pastor Kathy did the same exact thing. She tells the story of being at her church, Cross and Crown, also in Florence, South Carolina, and during a worship service getting this idea that perhaps God was calling her to be a pastor. And in the middle of church, she got up, ran to the bathroom, and locked herself inside. And she exclaimed in a loud voice in the bathroom, "There is no way, God, that you are calling me to be a pastor. I'm an interior designer, I like it, and I'm good at it." But she thought, maybe God's not convinced yet. So I'm going to sit in this bathroom, and I'm going to think how I would redesign it. Now, the funny thing is, usually when you argue with God, and let me tell you, arguing with God is perfectly fine. I did it this morning. Happens all the time. But when you argue with God, who usually wins? God has this funny way of winning when you argue with God. And off she went to be a pastor, and was the first female pastor at my home congregation. My grandmother didn't like it at all. But you know what? By the end of her life, she thought Pastor Kathy was the best pastor on the planet. God always has a way of winning. I thought about that story in connection with our text today of God making himself known in all the earth. And when you think about it with the Epiphany, it gets even more interesting when you think about the three stooges, the three wise men. Couldn't resist myself there. When you think about them and God calling them, these magi were not people of God. They were not sitting in a synagogue on the Lord's day. They did not devote themselves to studying the scriptures. Instead, they studied other ancient texts, and they did what? They looked up at the sky and studied the stars. Anybody else find themselves staring off at the sky every once in a while? These might be the last people you would think of to be called by God to play an important role in the story of Jesus Christ. And yet, even in their ancient texts, even in their study of the stars, these magi saw God and were called by God to get up and visit the child Jesus. And the story goes down century after century to this day when we celebrate this festival and remember this particular story in the life of Jesus. But it wasn't just these magi that were called by God to play an important role in the story of Jesus. Having come out of Advent and Christmas, we can think about the likes of Joseph, who God called. And how did God call Joseph? In a dream. Any dreamers here? Okay, I've got two of you. Three, okay, I got a few. God called Mary. How did God call Mary? Okay. It sounds like you know the answer, but there's like a lack of confidence here. What's that? An angel appeared to her. That's right. And on the story goes. The shepherds, there again, were called by angels. Time and again, in so many countless different ways, God comes to God's people, presents himself to them, and calls them to play an important role in the story of Jesus. So as I began, pastor-type people have call stories. we think about them, we reflect on them. But everyone in this room has a call story. You play an important role in the life and story of Jesus. I think about Martin Luther time and again, and he focuses on this important word, vocation. It's not just church workers who have a vocation, it's every one of us who has a vocation, a holy calling to be a part of the story of Jesus. And he used an example. He said, if you're going to be a Christian shoemaker, that doesn't mean that you put little crosses on every shoe that you make. He said, rather, it means you make a good quality shoe, and you charge a fair price for everybody who comes to get your shoes. And you take care of your neighbor by putting shoes on their feet so they can use those feet to carry the gospel to the world. And that idea can send itself out to every job, every task, every vocation that we might do. You are called to be a Christian teacher, a Christian business person, a Christian nurse, a Christian physician, a Christian attorney, and every other job that you can possibly think of. And what that means is you care for your neighbor. You provide good service for a friend in need. That means that the hands of Jesus working in this world are now your hands. The mouth of Jesus sharing love with others is your mouth. The feet of Jesus going out to a neighbor are your feet. The work, the love, the story of Jesus is commended to you as your holy vocation in the many and varied places that you find yourself. Today we celebrate these magi who got up and visited the child Jesus, answering the call to work for Jesus in the world. And as we begin a new year, that work is commended to you. When you leave here, we will invite you to take with you a chalking kit, to set apart where you dwell, where you live, as a holy place for God. And as you write the numbers and the letters and the crosses to set your dwelling apart, be reminded of the baptismal reality that Jesus has marked his cross on your forehead, that you have been set apart as holy, called to a sacred vocation to be a part of, to extend the story and the life of Jesus to all the places that you go and all the people that you meet. Amen.